Story 1. Why don't you rent an allotment to garden in? It'll be therapeutic for you. I was facing homelessness with 2 kids and couldn't afford the increased rent that my landlord had doubled without warning. I very politely replied, I can't afford my rent. I'm not sure I can stretch to the luxury of a therapeutic allotment right now, but it was a nice thought. Thank you. Story 2. My boss once told me, after a particularly rough year personally and professionally, that I should go to Paris for Christmas because that always cheered him up. I live in Australia, and this would have cost me thousands of dollars. Story 3. Not quite an answer to the question, but I hope in the spirit of it. When it rains, look for rainbows. When it's dark, look for stars. This was on the wall of a therapist clinic who dealt primarily with people affected by homelessness. Story 4. That it's okay to cheat on your lady because men should be men, and that's how we're made. My dad has always cheated on my mom, had 3 children on the side, and has always encouraged me to do the same because we're men. Story 5. When trying to buy a house, the person who was helping me in a first-time homebuyer program said, just increase your income by $100,000 a year, and you could afford almost any house in the more desirable neighborhoods. He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't looking in the neighborhoods he meant, and making $100,000 more a year doesn't just happen. Story 6. Just buy a house. The mortgage would be less than your rent. My former boss said this after I told him rent in the area was starting to rise, and I would probably have to cut back my hours to accommodate the commute time if I moved. Houses in my neighborhood, 800 square feet, $1.1 million. What he used to pay me, $18 per hour. Story 7. My ex's mother once advised me to just stop feeling depressed and start feeling happy when I was suffering through one of my deep episodes of severe clinical depression. I retorted back at her, if it's so simple, then why don't you go to the hospital's cancer ward and just tell the patients there to just stop having cancer? For once in her life, she was left speechless. Story 8. I think you just need to learn to save money. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. That's why we learned to save it. Save what? Money? What money? Story 9. After being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, the nurse friend who took my pistol strongly suggested against medication, stating that he sees people all the time who walk around in a stupor because of medication. He works in a surgical center. I work in psychiatry also as a nurse. He then asked me about my relationship with God and mentioned how his wife was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and was on medication, but she did not like it. So she changed her diet, I guess, and prayed more. So yes, out of touch to be sure. Story 10. I guess I can look back at this and call it hilariously out of touch, but it was not hilarious in the moment. When I was a 22-year-old doing my undergraduate studies in sciences, I was going through depression in my 3rd year and broke down crying in front of a professor who had been a mentor for a while. His advice was, men don't bring their feelings to work. Only women do that. In one line, he revealed to me he was both a terrible mentor and sexist. I hadn't even realized at the time how badly he was treating the girls in the class, but soon after, I started to hear the stories. Story 11. I was told to seek therapy when I was stressing over living paycheck to paycheck. I love how therapy became the one-size-fits-all solution to all issues. What if my issue happens to be money? That sense of helplessness went away when I started to earn more. Story 12. Take your resume, sit in their lobby, and refuse to leave until they give you a job. Tell them you will start as a custodian if you have to. Eventually, you will move up. No, I will get arrested for trespassing. Story 13. I'm a 44-year-old woman, divorced with 2 kids, living paycheck to paycheck. My dad, who is 64, told me I just need to commit to turning my financial situation around. He pointed out that my brother, who is 36, recently bought another house and lives debt-free because he stuck to a plan. My parents paid for his 4-year university degree. He just had his husband, also 36, pay the mortgage and most of the bills. He saved his money and bought a house across the country, even though they already own a house in the state. Because having no kids and a husband who pays all the bills is totally comparable to my life. Story 14. I live with chronic pain, and I had an old friend of mine say, can't you just take some painkillers? I refuse to believe some people are that dumb. Story 15. I was cooking at my parents' house years ago. I burned myself really badly reaching into the oven. When I asked if they had burned cream, my father said, "Just put some butter on it." He threw up his hands and was audibly frustrated when I insisted on the first aid cream. Story 16. You should buy a small apartment, and later you can sell it and buy a larger one. Eventually, you can own multiple apartments and earn money renting them out. That's what I did. I was looking at a rental apartment, and this advice came from the owner. Story 17. Just last week, my mom told me to invest in real estate. Not to live in, but as an investment. I'm at the very edge of what I can afford in rent currently, and she is fully aware of that. I couldn't even be mad about it because it was so ridiculous. Story 18. Just go out and get whatever you want. A response to, you cannot always get what you want in life. You have to have many factors working for you, including actually taking action. For them, that was not true, and you just have to get out and will it. I deduced that either they were really rich or a thief. Story 19. Seek therapy or get some help. I literally cannot afford it. We do not have free mental health care. I am here in front of you because I have no other choice. Story 20. When I complained about feeling manic on my medication, my psychiatrist said, "You should be happy because your medication is bought by people as street drugs to get high." Story 21. Follow your passion. Anyone who says this is almost certainly already rich, and it's good advice for those born into privilege or who have already achieved financial security. It's terrible advice for anyone struggling to save enough to retire, or is struggling to make ends meet, or really anyone starting out looking for economic, financial, or career advice. Story 22. I have severe anxiety, and the best advice by far is just stop worrying. What's the point? I wish I knew what the point was in having a mental disorder. Story 23. A Mormon father told me I don't need to learn to drive a car because Jesus is coming back to Earth soon. I was about 16 at the time and didn't learn until I was 27. Story 24. Our government recently decided to shut down multiple overnight emergency rooms. The advice our Minister of Health offered when people were upset was that they should try to go to the emergency room during the daytime. Show of hands, have you ever gone to the emergency room at night just for the fun of it? Story 25. I once had someone tell me to just be yourself when I was asking for advice on how to handle a job interview, as if walking in and saying, "I'm just me," would land me the position. Story 26. First time I spoke to a professional about buying a house, in my late 20s, the realtor asked if I had considered making the loan easier by asking a friend or relative for a one-time loan of $60,000 to $70,000. Story 27. Not so hilarious, but a friend who was a nurse once said to me, "How can you struggle with depression? You earn so much money." This was after my dad died, my mom was diagnosed with a serious illness, my girlfriend was in constant pain waiting for surgery, and I was struggling with an intense job and study on top of it all. She was one of my closest friends, and when she asked how I was, I opened up that I was struggling with everything going on. Story 28. I was really anxious about losing my job, which I eventually did, and one of the senior leaders told me that we need leaders from every chair. I still remember thinking, what was he even talking about? My chair was going away. Story 29. Had a sudden bout of major depression many years ago, on medication and everything. Advice. Have you tried going for a walk? Yeah, no. Never occurred to me. Go away. Story 30. I was undergoing chemotherapy for lymphoma and rapidly losing my hair, as expected, so I went to a salon to have it shaved off. There, I received advice on how to make my hair grow from other customers. They refused to stop even after I told them what the situation was. Story 31. I ordered a piece of clothing that ended up being too small, and my sister said I should keep it for inspiration to lose weight. What kind of money-wasting, eating disorder, inspiration advice is that? Story 32. My child has a severe mental illness which requires very close monitoring and medication. Took her to a new therapist and it was, "Have you just tried to ask Jesus to take away the schizophrenia?" We got up and walked out. Story 33. Just go into a business? introduce yourself, and give them your resume. Whether they were hiring or not, I had been looking for work day in and day out for a couple of months at that point. Story 34. I started a new job last year in a 3-person department. Both my lead and my supervisor quit on basically the same day. They decided to go with a rehire for the supervisor position, but he wasn't starting for a couple of months. When I went to the manager asking how he planned to divide up the responsibilities since I had no managerial authority, he started giving me a speech about how I should be happy to work beyond my position because I might get a promotion someday, kind of like the one they had just passed me over for. Then he pointed out the people he was taking advantage of in the other department he also ran, despite having told me a couple of weeks prior that he was looking for people to fill those same roles that these people were covering without the pay or title. I went to the director of operations and asked him if we needed to have a talk with the union about this. I ended up reporting directly to him until they could move the department to a different manager. Apparently, the previous one was friends with the higher-ups because he didn't get fired until the union sued for promoting a hostile work environment. Story 35. It's the only way to go. You have to do it. My wife's aunt was telling me I should buy a house on a property, tear it down, and build a new one the way I want, just like her son did with his wife. My wife and I were renting at the time. They were underwater on the house within 2 years, sold it, and ended up renting a basement apartment. Story 36. When I was deep in the trenches with job applications, my dad said, "Just go into an office and demand a job." I just looked at him and said, "Excuse me, we aren't in the 1950s, Dad." Story 37. I was talking about what college costs, and a very rich coworker tells me that you can save a bunch of money on college tuition by just paying all 4 years up front. He tells me this as I'm literally filling out applications for federal loans. Thanks, buddy. Story 38. On a much smaller scale, I was working retail and going to school full-time, panicking about money when my hours got cut. My boss said, "It's easy. Just give yourself a budget. You should do $200 per week like me. It's tough because gas, for her brand new Mercedes SUV, comes out of that too. But you can do it." I made $150 every 2 weeks. Story 39. It wasn't advice to me personally, but it had far more destructive potential. Yahoo Finance used to carry a career advice column by an abomination who called herself Penelope Trunk. Week in, week out, if you did the opposite of what that scamming, fraud, attention-seeking piece of garbage recommended, it would probably help your situation. Story 40. Every single thing a non-professional has ever said about my chronic, treatment-resistant depression. I go outside. I work out. I put on my mask and interact with real, live people in person all the time. None of your Facebook advice written by a professional motivational poster from the comfort of their cushy life is going to help me. So please stop. Story 41. Not very specific, but I was bullied a lot from a very young age, physically and emotionally. I'm pretty sure my brother actually fractured my rib one time. After I had trouble breathing for a solid week, I finally came clean to my mom. He would always make it worse if I told on him. I told her the timeline, what happened, and that I couldn't really breathe into my chest, but I could still breathe into my stomach. You can breathe into your stomach, okay though? Yeah, I can still do that. So just breathe into your stomach then. Conversation over. He did not get in trouble. I did not receive medical attention. Story 42. You should buy a house wherever you go to college and then rent it out to future students after you graduate. You can also rent out extra rooms to other students while you live there if you want housemates. Story 43. Learn to sew. There are so few women left who can sew. That's what men want. Learn to cook. Then you can get yourself a man. A man won't want someone who can't cook. Different pieces of advice given to me by different men at different points in my life. Funny thing is I can sew and cook, but I didn't learn how to appease some imaginary man. Story 44. Just ask your parents for some money. My college roommate said after I was struggling to work and go to school at the same time. If my parents had money to give me, I wouldn't have needed the job. Story 45. Just walk up to her, grab her, and kiss her. That will really show that you like her. My Brazilian mother, who was born in the 1960s, said this. I live in and grew up in America. Story 46. I went through relentless bullying, criminal maltreatment, repeat crimes against my family's household and property, an antisocial personality disorder frenemy for a supposed best friend, and a few public humiliations with almost no recourse from 1995 to 2008. A guy I was driving an 18-wheeler truck with said, "Be thankful for the bad experiences because they made you into the person you are today, and you can't be thankful for good times without bad ones." I am not a very nice person in the wake of all that now, and I often scream and yell about stuff from 20 years ago. I definitely name names. I am known to remind former bullies and publicly out them for their deceitfulness, openly call them every son of a bitch in the book, and hate their guts. But I didn't treat people that way, and I knew if I stood up for myself, I would get in trouble and go to jail or prison for handling it myself. So, I just have to continually accept the loss or the system will be harsher, and my criminals already willfully target our house and cars. Bar none, the worst advice I ever heard. Second place for worst advice offered was telling me as a victim I should be the bigger man. Story 47. Sell your Apple stock now. You are going to lose your shirt. This was years ago when the stock was at around $90 per share and before two splits. It closed at $258.20 yesterday. Glad I did not listen.